everyone, and welcome. I'm excited to spend the next 45 minutes with you talking about budgeting basics. Now, before you just cringe at that word budget, let me assure you this isn't going to be like a dry lecture that's full of spreadsheets. We're going to keep it like real and relatable. Think of this as a friendly conversation where we share stories and practical tips about money. Now, almost like we're chatting over coffee. So that's what I want you to think about this about, just like we're chatting over coffee. So I want to start with a quick personal story. So I like to, keep things very relatable with you. So I want to talk about my first real paycheck. Now that's where we're going to start out. Now I'll say this, I felt unstoppable. I remember splurging on a new phone and several nights out with friends. So now if you don't know, like my really first paycheck was when I was in the military. So it was fun until 2 weeks later when I checked my bank account balance and wondered, where did it all go? I was broke until the next payday. It hit me that earning money is one thing, but managing it is something else entirely. If you've ever been in that spot, just eagerly waiting for payday because the last one just somehow vanished, you are not alone. In fact, there's a survey back in the day that found that young professionals were living paycheck to paycheck. Now, that was me too, and it felt overwhelming. And that may be some of you today. I work with a lot of my clients, and they're like, I make all of this money, but somehow I'm living paycheck to paycheck. And Annette, I want to stop it. Like, I don't want to live paycheck to paycheck anymore. If I'm making like all of this money, where is my money going? Because it's overwhelming not to know where all of my money is going. So now I'm going to tell you the good news that it doesn't have to be that way, that you can make the decision to manage your finances and just live as comfortable a life as possible. So in this session today, we're going to uncover how something as simple as a budget can be a game changer for you. Now, I promise this won't be about, would you say, like depriving yourself or pinching pennies to the point of just misery, where you just can't enjoy life. Let me tell you this, budgeting is not about saying no to everything fun. It's about taking control of your money so you decide where it goes instead of just wondering where it went. Now, by the end of our talk, you'll see budgeting as a tool of freedom. You're going to be able to breathe. It's not punishment. What you're going to expect is we'll cover the basics, what a budget actually is and why it matters, and dive into some real life challenges that we young professionals face with money. And I'm saying I'm young, y'all, even though I'm getting up in age, but I'm young at heart. So we'll talk about becoming aware of your spending habits. You ever wonder how those little impulse purchases add up? Like my daughter said that she goes shopping and she's constantly spending money on food. And then at the end of the month, she doesn't know where her money went. So I'll walk you through different ways to set up a budget, like the 50-30-20 rule. The other one is zero-based budgeting, which is my personal favorite that I do every single month. And then the envelope method, put that cash in your hand. So we'll talk about, some tools and some apps that can make budgeting a little bit easier, and how to handle budgeting if your income isn't the same every month. Sometimes you're on a bi-weekly pay schedule, so you may have an extra paycheck or it just won't fit into that month. So, and more importantly, we'll explore the emotional side, things like impulse spending and money guilt, and how to cope with those. And throughout this whole chat that we're having, I'll share some stories, some mine, some from friends or folks that I've helped out, so you can see what principles look like in real life. So let's get started, y'all. So first up, I want to lay the foundation. So, what is budgeting? Really, like, why should we care? Why should you care about budgeting? Now, I talk to a lot of my clients and they're like, I do budget sometimes in my head and sometimes on my app, or I just take a look at my bank account and I see that the money's there. So now you may have heard about that. Like, here's a textbook definition of budget: it's a plan for your money. Now, in some simple terms, it's like a financial game plan for each month. That's what your budget is. Think of it as a game, y'all. Like, if you're able to do it, you've won that game. So it shows that what money is coming in and where that money needs to go. You have your income that's coming in, and how do you assign every single dollar a job with all the money you have coming in? So instead of that money just mysteriously going away, you're going to give it a job to do. Think of it this way: if your finances were a story, you want to be the author of that story, not just a character, just swept away by those long plot twists. You want to tell the story. Budgeting puts you in the driver's seat of your money. You're in control of it. Do you get it? Okay. Now, I want to talk about, why does budgeting matter? Like, what's the so what? So let's tackle that with a quick analogy. So imagine trying to drive somewhere new without a GPS or a map. I do that all the time and I end up getting lost. So I might get there eventually, or you might get there eventually, but you'll probably make a wrong turn and feel stressed. And living without a budget is like driving without directions. So you're essentially flying blind with your money. You don't know where you're going. You think you may take a left turn, you take a right turn, you think you're going down the right street, and you're going down the wrong street. So a budget gives you a roadmap. It tells you when to turn and what to avoid, like that dead end. So you're not lost at the end of the month, just wondering how you ended up in a ditch of debt or short on rent. Now, one big reason that budgeting matters is peace of mind. So, money problems are a top source of stress for a lot of people, especially couples in relationships. So, personally, I used to get anxiety every time I swiped my debit card, just worried that it might decline. Now, that's not a fun feeling for anyone. So, having a budget can seriously reduce that stress by giving you a sense of control. When you know exactly how much you can spend on eating out, or that new hairdo, or that new gadget, a new iPhone 17, whatever it is, you can enjoy it guilt free because you plan for it, right? So it's like that guilt proof spending. You don't feel guilty about it. In fact, having a plan for your money can turn financial chaos into something you can manage, which is, to me, incredibly empowering. What do you think about that? Now, I want to dig a little bit deeper into budgeting. So, now, budgeting also helps you save money and reach your goals. Remember that idea of giving every job a dollar that I just talked about? So now some of those dollars jobs will be to work towards your goals, whether it's paying off a student loan, saving for a car or a vacation, or building an emergency fund. Your budget carves out space for those goals on purpose. Now, let's take a little look at this. Like, for example, say you want to take a $1,000 trip next year. A budget can help you figure out that saving about $85 a month for 12 months will get you there. Just stay with me now. So it's a lot easier to reach a goal in those small steps than to magically find the big chunk of money later on. Like, right now, today, tell me, do you have $1,000? You probably do, but do you have $1,000 set aside for a big purchase that you want to make? Putting that money away gradually can help it seem less overwhelming, and that's what a budget does. Now, there is one writer who put this perfectly. They said, writing down your goals makes them more likely to happen. Now, and budgeting will reveal your spending habits. You might not notice otherwise. So, I have a client, or every time I work with a client, I say, work on this personal budgeting tracker, and I'll leave the link down below or pinned up here. Now, when I finally wrote out a budget, I quickly spotted my own little self-destructive habits. So I was ordering takeout like way more than I realized. So seeing on paper on a screen was a wake-up call, and my clients feel the same way. They say, I didn't know I was spending that much money eating out or on just these incidental expenses. So it's been very helpful to them just to establish that budget. Now, when you have a budget, it also leads to another point of awareness. Now, budgeting is like holding up a mirror to your financial habits. Sometimes that mirror is a little uncomfortable, like, wow, I spent how much on coffee this month? But it's better to know than not to know, right? So by tracking and categorizing your spending, you can identify those money leaks. Maybe it's the $40 you unknowingly burn on the snacks each week or subscriptions you forgot to cancel. This awareness is powerful. You can't fix what you don't see. So my financial planner let me know that, budgeting reveals those insights into spending habits that would otherwise go unnoticed. And I couldn't agree more. Like, it's like turning on the lights in a messy room. Like, once you see the mess, you can start tidying up, right? Like, if you have the lights off, like, you don't see that mess that's right in front of you. So it's like once you start budgeting, you see the mess that's in front of you. Now, let's talk specifically about young professionals, people who are in their 20s and 30s who are building their career and their lives. So, why is budgeting especially important for you? So, for starters, your generation faces some unique challenges. Now, we'll dive deeper to those, a little bit later, but you may often have student loans. You're entering into a crazy housing market, and the job landscape is always changing. And believe it or not, despite many of you having college degrees, on average, young professionals earn about 20% less than our parents' generation did, at the same age. That's crazy, right? But that's all about inflation because costs are higher and paychecks are relatively lower, which means every dollar counts. Now, if you don't budget, it's easy to fall behind or to just feel like you're treading water. And I don't want you to tread water. So, on the flip side of that, being young means that you have time on your side. You have decades ahead to save and invest and budget to help you take advantage of that. So even small amounts saved now can grow a lot a little bit later. So I want to talk about the long-term impact of choices later, but spoiler alert, starting early, even with a modest amount of saving, gives you a huge advantage thanks to compounding. Also, your spending patterns are different. So, younger individuals like you may tend to spend more on things like dining out. Now, I just mentioned that a lot of my clients do eat out a lot and they don't know how much you're spending. Then you have entertainment and travel. Like, we do this more now than the older generations. So, experiences are awesome. And who doesn't love a good weekend getaway or the latest foodie spot? But those can add up. So, I mentioned earlier that there was a survey that found that young people spend nearly $500 a month on those non essential items on average. Now, that was according to Charles Schwab, and I do like have some of my financial products with them. So, this is why I like to use them as a resource. Now, it says that stuff like eating out, streaming services, new gadgets, you know, things like that. Budgeting doesn't say don't spend $500 on that fun stuff. It says make sure that if you do, it's because you can afford it and you've covered your essential goals first. So it's all about balance. You get it? Am I making sense here? So, what I'm saying is that budgeting matters because it gives you control. It helps you reduce money stress and helps you reach your goals and just kind of like shines light on where your money is going. It's the foundation of financial wellness, y'all. So think of it as self care for your money, just like exercise or a good sleep schedule is self care for your body and your mind. It might take a bit of effort to set up, but the payoff is huge in the long run. Trust me. Okay, so now that we know why budgeting is worth your time, you might be thinking, that's great, Annette, but like it's still tough because of whatever your challenge is. Now, you're absolutely right. We all face some hurdles with money. Like I said, I did too, especially when you're just starting out. So, let's chat about those common financial challenges that you may encounter as a young professional and how they can affect your budgeting journey. So, I want to talk about those struggles with you and see how you can tackle them. So, I want to talk about some common financial challenges. So, you may say, Annette, if budgeting is so helpful, why aren't we all doing it already? Well, life has a way of throwing us curveballs, especially at our finances. So, especially too in your early years. So now let's talk about some of the common challenges you may face. So as I go through these, see if any sound familiar to you, and I bet at least a couple of them will. So I've had individuals say, I barely make enough money to cover everything. Now, when you're early in your career, starting salaries can be modest or a little bit low. So you might have an entry level job that doesn't pay a fortune. Yet the bills and expenses of adult life, they're very real. Like you got rent, you got car payments, you got groceries. Like why is avocado toast so expensive, right? So it feel like there's not much left over to budget with. Now, a lot of us have been there. So remember that stat over half of young professionals live paycheck to paycheck. It's tough to think about savings or investing when you're just trying to make it to the 30th or the 31st of the month without that overdraft fee happening. So I had a friend, Alex, who used to joke all the time that he had more month than money. Sound familiar? And that happened to him every single month. So for Alex and many like him, the struggle is real, y'all. So low income relative to expenses is a big challenge. Now, the other challenge is student loan debt. So now many of us, graduate not only with a diploma, but also with a hefty student loan balance. And that is so prevalent nowadays. So those monthly loan payments can take a big chunk out of your take-home pay, especially if you are struggling to make ends meet. And it's frustrating. You finally start earning money, but you don't get to enjoy it all because you're paying back loans from school. It's like this cloud that hangs over your head, and it's called your budget. So I remember sitting down with another friend, Nola, and she wanted to make her first budget. So what we did was we listed her expenses. Her student loan payment was almost as high as her rent. So we had to factor that in and adjust her other spending. Debt, whether it's student loans or credit cards or a car loan, it can really eat into what you have available for your other priorities. And those other priorities, they don't change either. Those are set. because you have to live, you have to eat, you have to pay rent, you have to keep your lights on. Now, the other challenge is the high cost of living. So maybe you live in a big city where rent is sky high, or generally everything just costs more these days. So a lot of young professionals, you tend to move to urban areas where there's big job opportunities, and you may face $1,500 or more in rent for a tiny apartment or a studio, and you want to treat yourself every now and then to a $20 takeout salad. So also, what adds up is that expensive happy hour. You know, you want to enjoy yourself, but if you're on your own for your first time, you might be shocked at how much basics like utilities and insurance or even furnishing your apartment can cost. So, the cost of getting on the housing ladder is also a challenge. So, buying a home often feels very out of reach, especially when you're in your 20s or 30s. So these home prices, as you may have seen, they fluctuate and they require down payments. So it may just feel like all of your money that you're earning after you graduate from college is going to just housing, just basic living expenses. And then you have FOMO, y'all. So let's talk a little bit about FOMO, which is the fear of missing out. So this one is less about numbers and more about lifestyle. So we want to enjoy life now, not 40 years from now, right? So there's pressure to go out with your friends, travel, attend that destination wedding, or keep up with the latest fashion and tech gadgets like that iPhone 17 that I mentioned earlier. So social media also doesn't help. When you see your peers posting their vacations, new cars, it could tempt you to fail to stay on track or to stay on track with everyone else. Now, I'll be honest, I felt that pang of envy and the urge to splurge when I see friends living their best lives online. So it's so easy to just justify swiping that credit card for an unplanned weekend trip because you only live once, right? And you don't want to miss out on those opportunities. But that kind of impulse can be a huge budget buster. So you want to be very careful about that. And when you're in the moment, it may be difficult to say no, especially when your friends are inviting you, but you have to make that decision to say no. Now, I also want to acknowledge something important, your mindset. So sometimes we avoid budgeting because it forces us to confront those hard truths. And it might mean admitting we can't afford something or that our lifestyle needs adjusting. And that can be uncomfortable. But remember, knowledge is power. By forcing those truths, you can start to change your situation. So I encourage you to approach budgeting not as self criticism, but as self care. You're doing something good for yourself, even if it means making some changes. Now, I've outlined a few of the big challenges. Now let's zoom in on one of the most eye opening parts of starting a budget, understanding your spending habits. So, how do we become more aware of where our money actually goes, and why is that awareness a total game changer for budgeting? So, let's explore that next. Now, let's play a quick game in your head. Without checking, try to estimate how much you spent last month on non essentials. Things like eating out, streaming services, hobbies, those late night Amazon, I gotta have this buys. Just think about it for 30 seconds. How much did you spend? Let's just go with one on eating out last month. Now let me know when you got a number in mind. Be honest about that number. It's not easy. Now, tell me this. Do you think that number is accurate? Or is it a bit of a guess? Because if you're not sure, don't worry. because most of us don't know exactly where every dollar went, especially if we're not actively tracking it. So, spending awareness is step one of budgeting. It's shining that flashlight in that dark room into the dark corners of your spending. And this can be really enlightening. Get it? So, I'll share a personal anecdote. When I first started tracking my expenses, I decided to comb through a month's worth of bank statements and categorize everything. Now, I knew I had a weakness for coffee shops and eating out, but let me tell you, seeing the total was shocking. I had spent over $200 a month just on coffees, takeout lunches, and just those quick bites here and there. Now, in my mind, I thought I spent like $50. I was like, I didn't spend that much, and I was off by a mile. Like, I thought I spent 25%, and I actually spent 75% more. And that was an aha moment for me. It wasn't that buying coffee or lunch was inherently bad, it was that I had no idea that it was draining that much of my money. So, if someone had asked, where do you think your money is going? I would have missed that by a long shot. Now, go back to your bank account, like actually pull it up and let me know if the number that you had in your head is what you actually spent. Now, if not, this is super common. Maybe for you it's not coffee, maybe it's ride shares or online shopping or subscription services. So, one friend of mine discovered that he was paying for 9 different streaming and subscription services because he signed up for the free trials and forgot to cancel. Now, for him, that was $100 a month, like right there, doing nothing for him because he didn't even use those apps or watch those streaming services. So, how do we become aware? The straightforward way, although it's a bit tedious, I do this weekly, is to track your spending. Now, you can do this a few ways, and a lot of individuals like to keep it in their head. Do not recommend that at all. So, what you can do is maybe what I do, which is a tried and true method for me, is to use a notebook or a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet is my personal preference. I write down everything I spend every week. Every Saturday, I track everything that we've spent, my entire family. And it's even that $2 candy bar that we buy at the store. If we swipe the card, you track that. Now, this exercise alone can be very eye-opening. You could also use a budgeting app or your bank's tracker. So there's many banking apps now that categorize your spending automatically. There are also dedicated budgeting apps like YNAB. And, we'll talk a little bit more about those in a little bit, but they link to your accounts and show you your charts of where your money goes. It's like having that personal finance spy report on yourself. And then you can review statements. So you can print them or download them, look at your last month's credit or bank statement, and just highlight those categories: food, transportation, shopping, gas, and just add them all up and put them into your budget. So now when you do this, you can expect a few surprises. It's normal. You might find out you spend, say, $300 on food delivery, $150 on Uber, $80 on those app purchases. Now, don't guilt trip yourself. The goal here is not to make you feel bad. It's just to get the facts of where your money is going. Now, I do want to share a story with you. Now, I do change names in these stories for privacy. So I want to share Emily's story. So Emily is a young professional who kind of like felt like she could never save money and didn't know why. So she thought she was pretty frugal. She didn't buy designer clothes. She had a small apartment. So what we did for her was we sat down and reviewed her last few months of spending, and a pattern emerged for her. She was a very generous friend. And almost every weekend, she was buying like rounds of drinks for her friend group and just picking up the tab for brunch for them. Now, if you look at this brunch by itself, it was a $40 brunch here or a $60 bar tab, on the weekend just to enjoy themselves. And it didn't seem huge, but like over a month, it was hundreds of dollars that she was spending and she was picking up the tab. So she was stunned when she saw this. Now, she didn't want to stop socializing, but seeing that total made her realize she could still have fun and maybe not always be the one that's footing the bill. Now, that awareness had her set a limit. She decided that going out, like, she needed to budget for it each month. So she even talked to her friends about it, and guess what, they understood, and like they all took turns covering things. And more often than once, she opened up about her goals, and this was a great example of awareness, and it can lead to small changes that make a big difference with your finances. Now, another piece of spending habits is to recognize those triggers. Like, do you notice you spend more when you're stressed or bored? Because, hello, retail therapy, like after a tough week, I see you. So, or do you tend to splurge like right when you get your paycheck and then like, okay, tighten your belt at the end of each month when you're like, oh, I'm getting real close to those insufficient fund fees. So these are habits and patterns like worth noting. So personally, I realized I do a lot of impulse online shopping late at night. So it's a terrible habit. I've gone to bed to order something and I totally didn't need it. So now I don't even bring my phone in the bedroom. I put it on the counter in my bedroom, in my bathroom on the charger because I'm like, I don't need it and I want to avoid that impulse shopping. So that's what the rule that I instituted now that I know that behavior about myself. Now, 9 times out of 10, like I don't like do those purchases and I save myself constantly from those random gadgets or clothes that I don't even need. So, again, that's a little bit about spending awareness, how you can be aware of your spending habits. So, now that we've flashed that little spotlight, turn the light on in the room on spending habits and awareness, you might be thinking, all right, I see some things I could change, but how do I do it when I put it all together into an actual budget? So, great question. The next step is taking this knowledge and creating a realistic budget that fits your life. And guess what? There are multiple ways to budget. It's not a one size fits all. So I'll walk you through a few popular budgeting methods, including the 50/30/20 rule you might have heard of, zero-based budgeting, which is the one that I personally use, and the envelope method, and just how to set it up so that it actually works for you. So let's talk about the budgets that are awesome, and then just challenges we face. So, how do you set up a budget that you can actually stick to? Step one, figure out your income and your expenses. So, your income is all that money you have coming in, and your expenses is, groceries, gas, fund savings, your credit cards, things like that. You want to write all of that down so you know how much you're spending on a monthly basis. Then you want to track those variable expenses. Those are things that change each month, like groceries, dining out, entertainment, shopping, and set a budget for that. So maybe you find usually you spend $300 on groceries and $200 on eating out, $100 on gas. Now, those are those random variable expenses, but you do want to budget for those. So that act of categorizing is very helpful. So, again, you have those common categories that include housing, utilities, food, sometimes split into groceries versus restaurants. Now, when you set up your budget, you can choose a method. One is the 50/30/20 rule. So this is 50% for needs, 30% for wants, and 20% for savings and debt. So wants are those fun or that optional stuff like hobbies, vacation, that premium Netflix plan. and then you want to set that to 30%. And then you have your needs, which are rent, utilities, groceries. You set that to 50%, and you put 20% towards your savings and debt repayment so that your debts are taken care of, and then so are your savings. And then you want to think about the next option is zero-based budgeting. So this method is a bit more involved, but it is powerful. So with zero-based budgeting, you give every single dollar a job until you have $0 left assigned in your budget. Now, that doesn't mean that you spend every dollar. It means that even the money you're putting into your savings or leaving a check-in, it's just kind of like as a cushion. It has an assigned purpose. So the formula is income minus expenses minus savings minus debt payments. So for example, if you make $3,000, you might allocate $1,800 to your expenses, $600 to savings, $200 to those extra debt payments, and $400 to other goals. And that totals the $3,000. So you've given every dollar a job to do. And you end up, and then you start that month over again with the new method. Now, the other way of budgeting is the envelope method. So it's kind of like cash stuffing. So this is kind of like an old school method where you literally use envelopes to manage your budget categories. So it works like this. You decide your spending categories and budget amounts for each, say $200 for groceries, $100 for entertainment, $50 for coffee shops. You then take out cash for those categories and put the cash in label envelopes. Now, once you spend in that category, so you have the $200 for groceries, once that money in that envelope is gone, then you don't spend any more that month. So that's how that envelope method works. And with that method, you avoid overspending in those categories because you're like, okay, once that money is gone, I'm not going to spend any more. So that can keep you on track with your saving and your spending. Now, which method is best? So it depends on your personality and your needs. So if you want simplicity and hate math, the 50-30-20 rule might be a gentle start. If you want to maximize every dollar towards your goals, you can use zero-based budgeting because it's fantastic. And if overspending is your biggest issue, envelopes could be the solution. Like I said, once that money is envelope, you stop spending. So you can ensure that your money, you're saving and paying off your debt. Now, step 3 is allocate to goals and pay yourself first. You want a realistic budget that isn't just about limiting spending. It's about carving out money for your financial goals from the start. This concept is often called pay yourself first. It means when your paycheck comes in, you immediately set aside the portion for savings or debt, extra payments before you start spending on that discretionary stuff. Next, you want to be realistic about your spending categories. So if you know you're going to want to eat out on weekends, budget something for it. So then you're not being overly restrictive in how you're managing your money. Now, don't pretend you'll spend $0 on wants. We all, want to spend $0 on wants, but just be realistic in how you're spending. Next, you want to write it down and give it a trial run. Actually document your budget either on paper, a spreadsheet, like I said, or an app, because seeing the plan concretely makes it very real for you. And then live with it for a month. Track your actual spending against what you plan. You'll likely need to adjust a bit, but that's what I tell my clients. Like, try this budget for 1 month and then see how it works for you. And then let's come back together and make some adjustments. Now, I'll say this, the bottom line is a realistic budget is tailored to you. So like a budget for me is not going to work for you. You need to have your budget be realistic to you and for it to reflect your priorities, both present fun and future security. It accounts for just like real life. If you have a pet, you have pet care category. If you love books, maybe a small book budget. It should stretch you a bit towards those better choices. Maybe, cook at home one more night a week to save money, but not so strict that you want to just kind of like rebel against your budget. Now, I did say I would mention a few tools like budgeting apps. So there's a couple out there. One is YNAB, which is You Need a Budget. There's also Good Budget. There's also Every Dollar. There's an Excel spreadsheet, which is my personal favorite. And then, like I said, there's your bank account that you can use to establish your budget as well, because they keep track of your funds and they have it allotted to different categories. And then you can also use expense trackers and receipt apps, just different things like that. So if you deal with cash a lot or you want to log expenses quickly, there are apps that let you input transactions on the go, or even take the photos of the receipts that you can save. Now, others, you can save a tiny notebook just to jot down cash spending and then later input it into like your main system that you're using to track your income. Now, I do want to talk a little about dealing with inconsistent income. So, budgeting on a steady salary is one thing, but what if you're a freelancer or a contractor or a tipped employee or anyone with an income that fluctuates? So, you may work in the gig economy or have a commission based job. So, that inconsistent income can feel like you're trying to hit just kind of like a moving target each month. So I've been there myself when I was freelancing during a career transition. So some months I was flush with cash, others I was scraping by. So you can base your budget on your lowest expected income. So a smart tip that I learned was to plan conservatively. I look back at my last 6 months of income and found the lowest income that I had and use that number for my baseline budget, because if I can cover everything on my worst months of income, I figured that when I had higher income, I could use that money and set it aside for savings or like those emergency type situations. And it also helped me create kind of like a buffer when I was going through tough months. And then I wanted to prioritize my expenses. Like I said, needs first and then wants later, because you have that irregular income. So it's crucial to list your expenses in that order of importance. Cover those absolute essentials first. So when money comes in, like rent, utilities, groceries, the stuff you must pay for just to keep life going. And then if you have more income, you could fund those next priorities, maybe transportation costs, insurance, those discretionary categories. And then, again, that irregular income, you want to adjust your budget each month. There's two more things I want to cover. You want to keep your business and personal income separate, especially if you're a freelancer or a side hustle. If you're self-employed and doing those side gigs, it's important to keep separate accounts for your business expenses and your personal expenses. There's something called the draw. So that's kind of like you paying yourself from your business account, but it's showing that this is where this money is going. It's going to pay you basically an income, and you want to set that up in a personal account that's separate from your business account. And then you want to save that extra for specific goals like taxes and benefits, because if you're working on your own, you are not paying those employment taxes, Social Security, Medicare. So you want to set that aside so that when you do file for taxes, that you have the money available. So I'm going to tell you a quick story about my friend Maria, who is a freelance graphic designer. So early on, she struggled because she'd get, I would say $5,000 from a big project. And she'd be like, Annette, I got like all this money that's available. And she would spend like normal and even like treat herself extra sometimes, and then have a month with only like $1,000. And then she would panic. So it's kind of like that feast and famine cycle, and it was very stressful for her. So, what changed with Maria? She created a baseline budget because she was tired of panicking. And she used that baseline budget of $2,000, and that was her minimum to cover costs, like what those expenses were. And when she got a big payment, she immediately put enough in savings to cover the next couple of months at $2,000 each. So essentially, she had paid herself a steady salary from that savings, but this required a little bit of discipline for her. But it did pay off, and within a year, she had a consistent system and never missed rent, even when client work slowed down. Like I said, she had that $1,000 month. So she says that budgeting was kind of like that factor that made her freelance career sustainable because, that financial uncertainty that she had at times was managed. So basically, kind of like to sum it up, like plan for the worst and use the best, which is that extra money wisely, especially if your income is erratic. So I want to talk a little bit about the emotional and psychological side of budgeting. Now, we talked a lot about budgets, but money isn't just math. It's also emotions, it's habits, it's sometimes even childhood baggage that you may have. So let's face it, if managing money were purely logical, many of us would never swipe a credit card for stuff like that we don't need, or feel anxious when checking our bank balance, or feel anxious about a debt collector calling. But we do because we are human. So let's dive into some of the common emotional hurdles: impulse spending, retail therapy, money guilt, and mindset, and see how we can handle them while budgeting. So you have impulse spending and FOMO. So we touched on FOMO earlier as a challenge, but impulse spending is often driven by emotion. Maybe you had a bad day and that new iPhone 17 or outfit would feel like a pick me up. Or you see a flash sale and it triggers buy now, think later. That psychologically buying can give you a short term high when that dopamine hits. But that's why retail therapy is a thing. So I mentioned that there was a survey that I found that 71% of people feel guilty after spending. And it's often because those purchases were impulsive or not aligned with like the bigger priorities. But in that moment, that temptation wins out when you're like, I really want to do this. So, how do we fight back? Awareness and delay. If you have something in your Amazon cart and like, I'm like, this is one of my triggers, just put it down. Come back 20 minutes later and see if that's something that you really want to purchase. Remove those one click purchases from Amazon, delete your stored card information that you physically have to get up to get your credit card to check out and make those purchases. It's called kind of like that delay that will prevent you from spending money that you didn't plan on spending. Now, for FOMO, kind of like spending on those social activities, one trick is to budget specifically for social events that you value and give yourself permission to decline others. Trust me, your friends will understand. Then you have money guilt and shame. So, do you ever spend on something and then feel like kind of like this knot of guilt in your stomach? Like, "Ugh, I shouldn't have bought that," or I'm so bad with money, and it's just something that's constantly in your head. Well, this is really common because money is tied up with emotions. Like I said, like security, self-worth, and even how we were raised. So, or maybe you grew up comfortable with money, but now on your own, you're struggling and you feel shame. Like, I should have had it together by now. So these feelings can actually cause Money avoidance, as in you feel so bad about your finances that you avoid looking at them. Skipping checking your bank balance or ignoring your budget after a slip up. That in turn can make the problems worse with your budget. So you want to be mindful of that. Now, to combat those negative emotions, you can build budgeting kind of like guilt free spending. Like we talked about, having some fun money allowance, or if it's in your plan, you don't need to feel guilty. You can enjoy it. This can retrain your brain that spending isn't evil when you do it responsibly. And then you can avoid shaming language, like don't call yourself stupid or bad with money. Like those labels can become self fulfilling. Instead, say, I'm improving my money skills, or I made an impulse buy that wasn't in the budget, but next time I'll try whatever your strategy is to avoid that. It's a positive mindset that fosters those better habits. So, also practice that self compassion. So, if you overspend, don't beat yourself up endlessly. It happens. The key is to learning and course correcting. So, a lot of us slip up, especially starting out with budgeting. Instead of, I'm terrible with money, like reframe it. I spent more than I wanted this month. Why did that happen? How can I adjust next month? Treat it like data, not a personal failure when you're budgeting. You got to have that positive self talk. Now, and then you also want to think about mindset, scarcity versus abundance. This might sound like woo woo, like budget your general money, but your general money mindset matters. A scarcity mindset is feeling like there's never enough. But an abundance mindset is believing you can improve your situation. You can find ways to earn more. And that budgeting isn't about punishing yourself, but about creating a better life. So think about that, and emotionally try to view budgeting as a positive challenge or a game. I've mentioned that earlier. It's not a chore. So celebrate those small victories. A week with no dining out, finding a $30 cheaper phone plan, not getting that iPhone 17, and just saving money. So say no to those impulse buys and just feel proud of it. Like these are wins, and share them with friends who support you, or even tweet about it or share about it on TikTok if you want some public accountability. And get some cheers. So there's a whole personal finance community online that celebrates each other's milestones, like paying off debt or savings goals. So like I said, if you mess up, and you will at some point, maybe you forget to budget for the holidays and rack up some debt, or you blow past your budget in some category. It's okay. Like you have to forgive yourself for those types of things. Now, I'll leave you with this. Budgeting is not about having less, it's about making room for what matters most. And by taking charge of your money, you're ultimately crafting the life you want that's aligned with your values and goals. So, I do want to thank you so much for spending this time with me. I hope you feel empowered and ready to take action, because you got this when it comes to your budget. So, go forth, implement your budget, watch your confidence with money soar, and cheers to your financial freedom. You can always reach out to me at www.harriswealthcoach.com. Google me, Annette Harris, financial counselor, and you can find me. And don't forget to check out the links below on how you can contact me or find other ways to manage your finances and tackle those financial challenges. Now, go make that budget and let your money start working for you.